Good morning. All right. It's sort of an exciting time in sports, relatively speaking. Today is the final of the men's French Open. Any tennis fans maybe out there? It's sort of there we go. I knew we'd have at least one. But it's cool. There's a special story because in the finals today is a man named Alexander Zverev, who has been the best player in the world for a few years. That's to say, the best player not named Sinner or Alcaraz. And he has this opportunity to win a major, the French Open, without having to face Sinner or Alcaraz. This could be the only time in his life that he ever has this chance. And so you have to imagine like the pressure that he's facing and the kind of mental battle ahead that he's got to overcome in order to achieve this goal. It's kind of exciting to think about. Did you know that North Carolina's NHL team, the Carolina Hurricanes, are in the Stanley Cup, the NHL championships? It's exciting. Sports are fun. I love sports, and our nation loves sports. I wonder if one reason that is because in sports, there's always, there may be some limits to this, but there are always a definitive champion, an objective winner. They play it out on the court or in the field or in the rink, and they battle it out, and by the end, someone is the definitive champion. And broadly speaking, everyone accepts that this person is the winner. The truth is, in our lives, we face different forms of competition all the time, sometimes big, sometimes small. Are you ever in a rush and you want to be the first one to get in the checkout line at the grocery store? Right? Sometimes groups have to make hard choices. I don't really want to be around if we ever decide to change the carpet color in the sanctuary. Somebody's choice has to win out. Of course, maybe we're thinking about elections and political realities. Yes, somebody wins the election, but there's rarely a consensus. There's rarely a feeling or a trust that the right person or right set of ideas has been elected. Sometimes that uncertainty is difficult or impossible to resolve. It seems to me that the matters of the most importance are the ones that are most difficult to sort out in any kind of definitive way. Well, there was a great dispute in Rome, in the Roman Church, a dispute with two distinct sides. And this month in the book of Romans, I hope you'll see what it means to maintain unity amid disputes that feel unsolvable. What does it mean to maintain unity or to bring about unity amid disputes that seem unsolvable? Okay. You'll remember the New Testament starts with 4 books called the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The next section of the New Testament is what we call the epistles, which is a Greek word, more or less, for letters. And these are letters that who writes? Paul. And he writes them to early church communities. Romans is the first of these letters, at least in the canon, in the order in the Bible. It's also the longest. And arguably, in terms of church history, it has been the most influential of his letters. And this is saying something. Paul's words make up about 25% of the New Testament. This is an important book. Martin Luther held this book in high regard, and it helped guide him as one of the reformers of the early church. It strikes me as a bit ironic that this book about bringing about unity was such an important source for him as he led the split from the Catholic Church. Maybe we can ponder why that might be as the weeks go by. Something else about Romans that is both obvious and overlooked, it was written to a church in Rome. We're talking about the Roman Empire here. This is the superpower of the world, and so these people are near that center of power, and we know that, yes, it'll be centuries later, but Rome will adopt Christianity as its state religion. And if not for that choice, we may not be here today. It enabled Christianity to have its place on the world stage for generations to come. Romans is an important book. Something else about Romans. Usually we think about Paul writing his letters to churches that he had either started or at least visited. Did you know that at the time of him writing the letter, he had not even visited the church in Rome? This is an important detail because he had to get his information somehow, otherwise how would he know what to write? How would he know what issues they're facing? Well, he got his information from travelers, mostly Jewish travelers. And there's like this backstory that leads to this. You see, in the year 49 CE, the Emperor Claudius expelled all Jewish people from Rome. That's a lot of people at this time. He expels them all from Rome. And Paul encounters some of these exiles in his own travels. There are two that get prominence in the scripture, and they're Jewish women named Priscilla and Aquila. The Jewish people are exiled from Rome. Now, the church in Rome, and we'll see this theme in many of Paul's letters, but they are having to work an issue out. Some Christians, some early Christians are Jewish Christians, and some are Gentile Christians. And so as they are forming the church, and as they are deciding their identity, and really having to resolve some really fundamental issues, they have to weigh these different cultures together. They were exiled, but in 54, about 5 years later, they come back. And what do you think happened while they were gone? The Gentiles took control of the church. Of course, there were no more Jewish Christians to do it. And so the Jewish Christians come back and they say, well, hey, wait a second. Aren't you going to give us a spot at the table too? Of course, the Jewish people had this great attachment and reverence for the law that we see in the Old Testament. So they're having to work out these issues. Is it required for Christian men to be circumcised? What role does the church have? If you go to Romans 14, you'll see some of these issues laid out. What role does the Sabbath play? Dietary restrictions. Is it important for Christians to keep kosher? Why or why not? These differences seem irreconcilable because they're not going to make any sense to Gentiles who never heard of the law before, and yet they're all the church together. So Paul has got to advise them on a way forward. How do they get through these differences? How do they get through this power struggle? Paul makes clear from the start that he's not going to take one side or the other. He takes a position of neutrality. Sometimes he'll use the word Greek in place of Gentile. I am obligated to both Greek and non-Greek, he says. I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. Paul is also critical of both groups. He names the faults of both groups. For the Gentiles, he condemns their sort of libertine, pagan roots, and you can read chapter 1 of Romans. It's sort of this notorious chapter, this list of sins that the pre-church Gentiles would have engaged in regularly: sexual immorality, substance abuse, idolatry, these kind of things. And there are bits of this, of course, still lingering even after the church comes to be. The other thing that he criticizes them for is their arrogance and their inability to work with the exiles who have returned. Well, to the Jewish Christians, Paul has plenty to say as well. He thinks that their over-reliance on the power of the law, and this is speaking to this particular group. We're not talking about anything general about Jewish people in general. But at this time and in this place, Paul says holding the law up so high and expecting this impossible standard of behavior inevitably leads to hypocrisy and puts church credibility at risk. In the end, both the Jewish and Gentile approach fail to achieve the true goal, which for Paul is to reconcile humanity to God. So Paul, and I know I use this phrase a lot, but Paul invites the church and us to zoom out and see the larger picture. He does this by appealing to the figure of Abraham. It's easily missed, but Abraham comes before Moses. Genesis has Abraham, Exodus has Moses. Abraham is first. If you look at the first 11 chapters of Genesis, you've got all sorts of things happening. You've got the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. You've got the murderous brothers, Cain and Abel. You've got God flooding the world and Noah building his ark. And you've got the building of the Tower of Babel. These are important primordial stories that speak to the human condition, but it's not until God speaks to Abraham in chapter 12 that God's people then have a starting place. Because God promises salvation to Abraham. Abraham, I want you to see, represents a new beginning. And just as he has that role in the book of Genesis, for Paul, he has the same role for the Roman church. A new beginning. God promises to Abraham that he will be the father of many nations, of descendants that are greater than the number of stars in the sky. The whole story of God, the Bible itself, depends on this promise. And Abraham faced many challenges, and he wasn't perfect, but he kept his faith. He did not give up on the promise. So I think the Roman church had gotten ahead of itself. Yes, eventually they're going to need to work through these disputes, and they do. But without faith like Abraham's, they're operating on a flimsy foundation until we establish this mutual starting point of faith, of not the things that we are so sure about and certain about, but rather the things we're uncertain about. If we can start from that humble place of faith, then we can work together forward. Otherwise, he writes, the church will be, quote, under the power of sin. What can we learn from Paul's argument as a church, as a nation, as human beings? Well, it almost seems like we've reached a point in our public discourse where the substance of an argument no longer matters. The only thing that seems to matter is what team you're on. I wonder if Paul is challenging us to reframe the way we understand relationships. This is why the church is so important, by the way. Because the starting point for the church is not our differences. The starting point, rather, is faith, our mutual submission to forces beyond ourselves. Instead of arguing about who can accomplish what, we begin with the common understanding that we can't accomplish anything without the grace of God. Do you see how that changes everything? Now the two parties are on the same path together. The central argument of Romans is justification by grace through faith. Or as James R. Edwards puts it, faith has always been God's means of reconciling humanity to God. We will not be saved by what we do or the ideas we have or how we are perceived by others. When God appeared to Abraham, God established a covenant in which God invites us into relationship, and faith is the way we enter into that relationship so that we no longer have to rely on ourselves. So we are moving, not aimlessly, but together towards salvation. May we approach the same table this morning. May we feast together. May our hands be turned upward, ready to receive God's grace. May we receive this gift together, because you know what? All of us equally need it. Amen.